Well, welcome back everybody to Chapter 9, Communications, and today we're going to be looking at just some fundamentals, some definitions, and the process of communications. So let's go ahead today and start with a new chapter, and hopefully we can understand a little bit more about what it takes to be better communicators. Okay, everybody, today we're going to be in Chapter 9, which is dealing with communication. And one of the fundamentals of org behavior, when you're dealing with people, whether you're dealing with groups or individuals, you have to understand the principles of communication, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I want to start with a little video that kind of demonstrates the complexity of communication and how you can have a miscommunication. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and then we'll come back to our presentation.
That's on video.
Okay. All right, so let's have Matthew then start.
Go back. What?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Oh no, it's not. I don't know. Wait, what was the second? Ah, crap, I forgot it.
No talking.
Really?
Okay, so what do you think it is? Okay. And let me get a picture of what the word was, or the sentence was.
Well, what you saw in that video was just a kind of a funny way of explaining how easy it is to signal or missignal someone and get involved in miscommunication. So that happens in relationships, it happens in work, it happens in ministry. So to understand the principles of communication is a just kind of a fundamental building block to be an effective manager or leader or minister. Now, what is communication? Well, it's the transmission of information from one person to another to create shared understanding and feeling. Now, here's the key to it: shared understanding and feeling. You do that with one-way communication, which information flows only in one direction, or you can have two-way communication, which you send it and the receiver has it and then provides feedback to the sender as to what he or she received. Now, folks, the question that I ask oftentimes in my classes, what if you have an important communication to send out to your people and you send it out and they do not receive it the way that you meant them to receive it? Let's say your job, and you're in your job and you have an important directive, something that's coming up, and you communicate it and they misunderstand what you said. Who's responsible? Is it the person's responsibility because they didn't understand what you were trying to say, or is it your responsibility because you didn't send it the way that they could receive it and get an accurate depiction of what you were saying? Well, really, it's both. Both sides, sender and receiver, have a shared responsibility to make sure that the communication process is going smoothly and what is being sent is being received correctly. Now, the communication process, we're going to go into detail here in just the next slide that talks about it, but you begin with the message, which is originated by the sender. That message is encoded. It's put in a meaningful way to be transmitted, and then you have the channel, which is the means of communication. You have the message, which is decoded, and then you have the message receiver who decodes it and receives it. Now, you should be getting feedback from the receiver to the sender to verify that what was sent was received correctly, because what you see here in the interim, in each of these gaps, is what we call noise. Noise is any and everything that can provide a barrier to the receiver getting that message the way it was intended. So let's take a look at these elements a little bit more in detail. You have the sender, again, which is the source of the communication. You have encoding. That's the process by which the message is translated from an idea or thought into a transmittable symbol or symbols. So you are putting these messages, these words, whatever it is you want to communicate, into some type of coherent whole. And then once you've done that, you have to send it out some way. The medium used to send the message to the receiver is what we call the channel. And it can be verbal, it could be nonverbal, it could be electronic, it could be visual, whatever the way that that communication is sent would be called the channel. Now, once it is sent over the channel, that's it for the time being for the sender. What's next is the decoding, and that's the process of translating the message back into something the receiver can understand. So as you encode, they have to decode. Now, a lot of things, a lot of noise can take place already just with these first four elements. But receiver is the target of the communication, and he or she will be the one that will decode the message. And then a check on the success of the communication is what we call feedback. And a lot of times, folks, that's where we fail. We don't verify that what was being sent was what was received. I can't tell you how many times that's happened in my ministry and in business, where you send out a message and it is misunderstood. Now, folks, think about this. I'm a pastor, and I have many people in my congregation. And when I'm preaching a message, there may be some that will interpret it one way, some will interpret it the others. That's why I stick to the Bible, strictly to the Bible, because people are still, even though you are holding to the Word of God as a pastor, you're still going to have people who will take it the wrong way. Some will get offended. Some will be convicted. Some will rejoice. Some will be moved to tears. There's just any and every way that people can receive a message. And usually I'll get feedback. I can see the facial expressions out in the congregation, and that's instant feedback. And then I may have someone come and say, Pastor, what were you talking about? Especially when we get into kind of complex issues, some deep theology. They're going to have questions, and they want to make sure that they understand what I said. Well, folks, I take that seriously. And I also take it seriously when I teach. I want to make sure that what I'm sending you, and we use multiple channels to do that, but I want to make sure that what you are receiving is exactly what I sent. That's why we have visual aids like PowerPoints, we have video, we have audio, all different types of channels designed for you to be able to just receive that message. Now, noise. Now, noise is anything that blocks or distorts or changes in any way the message the sender is trying to communicate. Noise doesn't have to necessarily be a person not wanting to listen. Noise can be physical noise. I was teaching for a college, and we were down in the basement, and I had a Saturday class with this group. And on Saturdays, it was empty, and we were down there by the boiler room. And when those boilers kicked in almost every 15, 20 minutes, they made the loudest, most annoying sound, and that was noise. Or maybe you have been like me. I've preached a funeral, and the cemetery was in the flight path of an airport. So I would have to time my message in a way to be able to at least offset some of the air traffic that was going over us because those engines would drown me out. So you have all different types of challenges in ministry and in business. And we're going to talk about barriers to communication, but there are physical barriers. There are barriers that are internal, people's attitudes and perceptions and so forth. These things can provide noise. And as we grow more into technology, what you may see as a normal means of communication, now texting or email, you can or run the risk of being miscommunicated or being misunderstood. I know I've had people who have texted me and it sounded like they were as mad as they could be. And then I would call them and, oh, no, I didn't mean to make it sound like that. So those are some of the challenges that we have when it comes to communication. So it's not something that is just a simple thing. There is a process to it. Now, just to kind of reiterate, we talked about nonverbal communication just briefly a minute ago. You have body language, and body language can tell a lot about a person and how they receive your message. I get a lot of body language, or I see a lot of body language on I-240. Cut somebody off, and you're going to see body language in church. I may see people looking at their watch a little bit more than usual. That's body language. So body language is that nonverbal element to let the sender know that, hey, they're either into it or not into it. And there's been people that I've misunderstood. I would say something and they would have a frown on their face, and I would think I've made them mad or that I have offended them, and they said, no, I'm just trying to understand, or I'm trying to grasp what you were trying to say. Think it through, concentrate on it. So body language, verbal intonation, the way that you use your voice. There are different techniques that you can use when you are trying to persuade people, and you can do a lot of persuading just in the way that you talk. Your intonation, your rate of delivery, the volume, the way that you alter it. And take a look, if you want to see people who are good at this, take a look at TV evangelists. Notice how they talk. Notice how they use pauses and how they change the rate of their delivery, how they change their volume. That says a whole lot about the power of verbal intonation because the people are into it. And then you have environmental elements. Like I said, I had a boiler room to deal with. I had the flight path of an airport to deal with in the past. There are other types of environmental elements. The time, for instance. You may have a hard time taking a class early in the morning. You may not be a morning person, so that may be an environmental element. You may be in a classroom that's too hot or too cold. I've had to deal with that. And that's environmental elements. So anything that includes this and anything else that might take you away from getting the message and even sending it the way it should can be noise. Now, when we talk about communication, we have to talk about the dynamics of interdependence. That means we are all dependent upon each other to make sure we're getting work done. Now, I can't emphasize it enough that organizations, if they're going to succeed, even in churches, they have to work together. They have to know that nothing operates really anymore in a vacuum. What you do affects someone else. What they do will affect you ultimately. And that's been a kind of an ideology that's fairly new. I would say in the past couple of decades, this has started to emerge. It used to be companies had divisions or departments, and they stayed in their own little world. You had HR, you had research and development, you had maybe engineering and finance and marketing and sales. Each of these elements, each one was separated by their function or functionality. And it caused problems because it created a sense of isolation, it created territorialism, and no one really wanted to talk to the others. So people would make decisions, as we said, in a vacuum, or as some people say, in a silo. And that has been really not a good business strategy for companies or even in churches. Today we realize that what one department does will affect other departments, and what they do will affect your department. And that gives us the idea of the interdependence of organizations. Now, there are different types of interdependence, and we see here there is pooled, there is sequential, and there's reciprocal. So let's take a look at those three different types of interdependent relationships. As you can see at the top, pooled interdependence means that Lisa, Dante, and Tyler have to contribute their share for them to be able to produce a group output. One of the things that I do in my graduate classes, not for this college, but another one, is I have group projects, and I'll give them a big project at the beginning of the semester, and they'll have all semester to work on it and to present it as a group. Well, invariably, what will happen is that one person will normally not pull his or her own weight, and it drags everybody else down because they're having to not only worry about their responsibilities, but they're also having to deal with the person who is not contributing. And it never failed that usually a day or two before the presentation, I would have several call from each of the groups, upset, crying, because they haven't been able to complete the project. And I don't give them any leeway. I said, you've got to work it out. And so that would be an example of pooled interdependence. That means it takes everybody to pitch in his or her own weight and produce a whole that is comprised of each of the elements. Now, sequential interdependence would have Lisa provide an output that will go to Dante. That will be his input. He'll take Lisa's input and do whatever he needs to do and produce an output for Tyler. That will be Tyler's input, and Tyler will have an output also. So everything goes in sequence, and you've probably seen assembly lines where you take a product in one stage and then move it down the line to the second stage and then the third stage and so forth. So that would be sequential. Now, reciprocal interdependence is where everybody is affecting the other. Just as I told you about the college, let's say Lisa works for HR. Dante works for sales. Tyler works in production. Everything that Lisa does will affect Dante. Let's say, for instance, Lisa drops the ball on pay. Well, that's going to hurt Dante. Dante's not going to be able to really do his job effectively, And if sales suffers, then guess what? Tyler in production, they're going to be affected because there's not that many sales, so Tyler's not going to be able to work that much. And if Tyler can't work that much and sales goes down, then Lisa's going to be affected because there's going to be probably layoffs and so forth. So everybody in a reciprocal, interdependent relationship is dependent upon the other. No one does anything alone. They all work together, each one affecting the other. Now, some of the barriers to communication, and these are important when we take a look at noise. Noise can involve what we see here, selective perception. We selectively see and hear based on our expectations and beliefs. And here, when we get to perception, we're dealing a lot with psychology. But the social science world will tell us the things that we experience, we perceive selectively. This is why they say at a crime scene they try to get witnesses as quickly as possible, because two people can observe or witness one singular event but have two different perspectives on it. Misperception. Messages are not always decoded by the receiver in the way the sender intended. Again, let's say that you're being given a text and you think the person is chewing you out, but you misperceived it. Now, whose responsibility is that? Is it the sender for maybe writing in all caps, and I think that's the symbol for anger, or you're yelling? Or is it the receiver who doesn't clarify or get feedback? Well, again, it's both. Filtering is information intentionally withheld, ignored, or distorted to influence the message that is ultimately received. We have in our brains a way of filtering out things that are important to us, things that are not important to us. Let's say, for instance, if you're married, maybe your spouse is watching football and he's into it or she's into it, and then your husband or your wife comes and they want to talk about yard work or whatever. Well, chances are you're going to filter out all of that stuff and just focus on what is important to you. In the work world, it can be very easy to filter out information that doesn't involve your department directly, but it's still important information to know. So we have a tendency to do that in our personal and in our professional lives. Organizational barriers. A firm's hierarchical structure and culture can influence who is allowed to communicate what to whom and may limit how messages can be sent. And we have downward communication, upward communication, two-way communication that occur in organizations, and it's just the way that companies communicate. Some companies don't want you to talk to the lower people talking to upper management. Some have an open door policy. It's just the way that that structure and culture is designed. And then cultural barriers. You know, we have diversity in the workplace today, and we've talked about how diversity has changed the landscape of business. Well, that's good, but we have to understand that there are different cultures that have different ways of expressing and different beliefs and different values that may not coincide with ours. So if you are dealing with a person who is, let's say, for instance, from the Middle East, and they may be a masculine type of individual that really do not tolerate or like women in the workplace. That's one thing that we've had to deal with going overseas and working in the Middle East, is that women are believed, it's in their masculine mind, that women should be at home and they're not to have places of authority. Well, there's a lot of value that these people bring, but you have to realize that they have different cultural values, and you're going to have to deal with that. Noise, again, is anything that blocks, distorts, or changes the message the sender intended to communicate. So All of these things really constitute noise, but noise is that actual event that can distract you and keep you away from what's important. Now, today we have all types of methods of getting our communication across. Some of the most important are the internet, collaboration software, intranets, oral communication, and a combination of all of these. The internet is very quick, it's very convenient, and very popular today. Collaborative software like Zoom can help you come together. Intranets, which is the company's internal internet. Oral communication, we still talk, maybe not as much, but we still talk to each other. And then a combination. You can use all of these to be able to communicate. Now let me go ahead and just put all of these up. Now when it comes to media richness, richness is the ability of media to carry nonverbal cues, provide rapid feedback, convey personality, and support natural language. Now, the ability for these things to occur depends on, as you see, 4 things: interactivity, or the availability of feedback, the ability to transmit multiple cues such as physical presence, voice, nonverbal cues, pictures, language variety for conveying a broad set of concepts and ideas, and personal focus, or the degree to which it allows the expression of emotions and other social cues. So richness is that ability for media to be able to provide you with a full means of being able to communicate with others. And Table 9.4 just gives you some of the different types. You have face-to-face, which is high in everything. Video conferences, because you're there and you're talking, that's fairly high. Telephone, moderate, because you can't see the person. You don't know what their body language is like. So a telephone does have some benefits, but it's not quite as high as face-to-face or video conferences. IMs, moderate to high, but again, instant messaging and email, these are electronic media channels that may not be able to transmit the cues that you would need to see in order to understand fully what the sender is saying or communicating. Personal, written correspondence, informal, it's low in everything. To be able to write it out, it has been a major way of communicating. Even when you're texting, I would say that's still low, but writing is not as good as being able to do face-to-face, verbal, visual communication. And with written correspondence, again, you're left up to interpreting a whole lot of things. Now, organizational communication is the exchange of information among 2 or more individuals or groups in an organization that creates a common basis of understanding and feeling. It could be formal or informal. It could be downward, which means that you have the executives sending messages down, but that's it. It's the top-down approach. Upward is the bottom-up approach, where you can have people at the lower levels of an organization communicate to upper levels. Horizontal means that you're communicating across departments at your own level. And then diagonal is where you are really going from one department to another department, up and down, and sideways as well. And these are just some of the different definitions of what we have talked about. And in Figure 9.3, as we close out, this is just a visual depiction of what these types of communication would look like. Horizontal would be across the board. Diagonal, you would see would be going up or down. Downward communication is as it implies. Upward communication is as it implies. So there's all types of communication methods and directions that an organization can take. The importance, though, is to know this is how they communicate and be able to follow effectively using that type of strategy. Today we've wrapped up Chapter 9 and we've seen some of the basics of communication as much as the process of it, how it flows, and the importance of communication. I hope after this chapter you'll be able to understand and appreciate better the dynamics of communication, which will make you be an effective minister and a manager in business. Have a good week, and we'll start again with Chapter 10.